Hey Clay, amazing to have you here on the podcast. You're a serial entrepreneur with decades of experience in emerging technologies, and today I would like to talk with you about your personal experiences that led to your success today. Can you share with us what building a better future means to you and how that philosophy has shaped your journey?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, André. It's really a pleasure to be speaking with you. It's been a pleasure to get to know you over the last couple of months. This idea of building a better future, for me, I think the personal motivation is that I was born into an intentional community back in the 70s that had a very idealistic vision. And so I think I kind of came by it naturally, this idea that you can, through your actions and through ideas, make the world a better place. I also grew up in the US, I think at the peak or nearing the peak of its kind of power, and there were a lot of good things. There were a lot of negative things, but there were a lot of good things that were happening there and things to be optimistic about. And then I think if we look back on technology and the role that technology can play in making the world, in making improvements, there are many ways to look at history and look at the development of society, but one way that I find compelling is to think of us as tool users, tool makers, tool users, and that our societies are shaped in a lot of ways by the tools that we develop. So if we look at what I've been working on for the last over 10 years, since 2014, with AI, I think what really appeals to me about AI is the ability to identify patterns that exist but were unknown or hard to see or impossible to see because of the cost, because of the complexity, because of the lack of data. And now we're living in a world where we have dramatically more computational power, we have much better algorithms, and we have dramatically more data as well. So we can see patterns, we can see reality better than we could see it before. And then I think we can make decisions that are in line with our values. And that's a very kind of high level description. But I think it's very satisfying for me as a kind of curious person and a person who's often confused to be able to use these tools and say, okay, wow, this is really the base level of reality and this is how it can be improved. And of course, for me with AI, that started with payments. We were looking as a team at consumer credit card fraud and where a transaction you'd try to make a transaction, it would be blocked. And that was a failure of a bank and a failure of the banking system to accept a transaction that clearly wasn't fraudulent. It's you, it's your card, it's your money, you have it on it. And so those patterns weren't visible because you didn't have enough computational power, enough data, the algorithms weren't there. We were involved in, really driving that forward, and that was a very rewarding thing for me in a very niched area. And then about 5 years ago, I started getting involved with growing plants indoors and looking at growing plants that people can consume at much lower costs and making those available everywhere. Obviously it's cheaper just to throw seeds in the ground and wait for something to come up. But with climate change, there are a lot of places where if you throw the seed, nothing's going to come up anymore. And that can be, very disruptive as well. So one of the stories that was kind of burned into my mind and a motivation for getting into this area was what happened in Syria, where the collapse of the Syrian society and the mass migration into Europe, which led to this kind of right or far-right response and this kind of destabilization here in Europe, really followed, and a lot of people don't know this, but it really followed 3 or 4 years of famine. And that famine came from climate change-induced lack of crops. So there just wasn't enough to eat, and no society survives very long if there isn't enough food. So that kind of inspired me to say, okay, I've been working on, with a team of really brilliant people, I've been working on identifying these patterns and figuring out, how to make better decisions. Can we apply this to plants that people consume and build, a more resilient, brighter future for our societies?
Interesting, because when people think about AI, sometimes they think, oh yeah, it will take my job or it will take over, but you see more of a chance to, like on the bigger scale, change the world to a better place.
Yeah, and it's a big question, this whole job loss thing. And I have several perspectives on it. I wrote a book about it. My kind of general view is most people don't like their jobs. So I think people think, okay, if I lose my job, that means I've lost a structure to my day. I've lost income. I've lost a sense of purpose. I've lost some kind of social connection, which happens at work. But my kind of view on that, if we extend it out into the future, or we just sort of say, well, how could things be different and better, is that if you look at what people want, a sense of purpose, an ability to be kind of useful and to contribute, an ability to apply your skills, social connection, a way to organize your day, I think on a scale of 1 to 10, work for most people doesn't get above a 3 for any of those. So it's not the best way for them to organize their day. The social connections at work are not as good as the connections that they could have with others in their community and in their family. They could have more of a sense of purpose that's aligned to their values by working on other things. So I think we can just look at the numbers and say, I think it's 80% of people, it depends on the survey, are really, really not happy with their jobs. So having those jobs that people are dissatisfied with change, morph, go away, it's a big loss if nothing replaces it, but I think we need to take it as a baseline and say, how can we as a society do better on each one of those things? And I think that really goes back to narratives, so the kind of stories that we tell ourselves. And for me, growing up in the US, I grew up in a very kind of high performance culture. I remember going once to the gas station back when people would pump gas for you. And my grandmother, looking at the guy pumping the gas, looking at me and saying, effectively, what I would understand now as an adult, this is a person of low character, of low value in our society, right? These were the messages that I was told. If you're pumping gas, if you're doing a basic job, then you're not quite a full, equal member of society who should be valued. And I think that's a terrible message. I love my grandmother. I don't want to take anything away from her. She was part of that. That's kind of how we viewed things. And, we wanted to assign status and structure our society based on contribution. But I think that, that pumping gas is effectively what most of us are doing now. It's not really a place where we're being, really realizing kind of the full potential of what we could be doing as a person with our jobs. And, when I was growing up, there was a big focus on intelligence. And if you go back 100 years before that, there was a big focus on physical strength, which of course became irrelevant with the Industrial Revolution. And I think we're now at a stage where intelligence is going the way of big muscles. I don't know anybody who's smarter than the AIs that we use today. I think the intelligence is there. So I think we need to have these conversations. We need to have new stories, new narratives about what it means to be a human, how we should spend our days. Really core, basic questions are coming up. And I'm excited about how we answer them.
And when you think about AI and private equity, or when it comes to buying a company and selling a company, and how AI plays a role in cutting costs, how do you see that?
So I see it as a bigger change even than the internet, which was the revolution that I came into as a young person, started an internet company in 1999. I'm looking at an acquisition right now, a company in the US, and this company is a pre-AI company. Basically, almost all companies, by definition, 99.99% are pre-AI companies. So the question that I have and the team that I'm part of that's working on this acquisition is, how does this company look different once we bring AI in? What does AI change, right? How does it leverage, how can we leverage it to achieve higher revenue and lower costs, right, at the most basic level? This won't be a private equity acquisition, but it follows a playbook that you're seeing all the time now in private equity, which is you've got a 5 to 10 year time frame, you're buying it for X, you want to sell it for 3 to 5X. How are you going to do that? You're going to cut costs, you're going to improve operations, ideally you're going to drive an increase in revenue. So you need to model that out. This company that I'm looking at now has, let's say, 150 employees. They're fairly, it's a fairly expensive set of employees. And if we look at what AI can do, it's a multiplier. So the person was able to do 1 unit of productivity for X in compensation. Well, what if that person could do 10X now, right? So everything from ChatGPT helping them write and process emails and internal communications, to planning, to presentations, to all the coordination that you need to do within a company. I see that becoming much lower cost. I see the company reducing, consequently, the size of the team, which also has big benefits for in-person, face-to-face discussion and speed, because the amount of time that you need to enroll people in a 150-person company versus, let's say, a 30-person company is dramatically different. So I think it's a team that can move faster, that can innovate. Then if I look at how that company is currently interfacing with its users, there's a lot of information that's collected, but that information isn't processed and fed back to the user in a way that's really actionable and helps that user reach their goals. So, and it's not exactly clear what form that'll take. Every week there's a new AI-based interface. I think video has just gotten there, a video avatar, within the last week or two. Here we are in mid-March. I think in February it wasn't there. It was detectable. Now I can't really detect it. There can be telltale signs, but I think it's pretty much there. Human level audio, I think, has also come in the last month or so with Sesame. So the ability for someone who's interfacing with this company who was previously using forms and old school stuff that hasn't changed in 30 years, to now have a kind of avatar or have a sort of close to personal communication, I think is a game changer. I think it'll lead to much more engagement, much richer data, and much more actionable information coming back to the consumer who's interacting with this tool because they have a goal. So there's a lot of friction in providing information and getting it back to reach the goal, and I think we can collapse that and reduce the friction dramatically, make it a more enjoyable, engaging process. So I think that can help drive engagement, revenue increase. I think we can probably reduce the staff by 2/3 would be my guess. I think we can innovate much more quickly. We can have ideas, test them, see what works, see what doesn't work. I haven't gotten into kind of the setup. I assume it's cloud-based, but there's also a chance that the company is not in the cloud, has its own servers. It's a company that's been around for 15 years, right? I certainly used to have tons of servers and data centers. So there could be some cloud-based changes that we could make, which would also help enable the transition to an AI-first company. So yeah, I think bringing in experts like yourself in AI, people who are trained in AI, to understand what's the problem that the company is solving, how have we been solving it with the tools that existed in the past, and then what's the delta in terms of revenue increase and cost reduction if we implement across this whole suite of AI tools, right? I mean, I think the intelligence is there. Now it's about applying, the AI intelligence is there beyond human. And I think now it's about getting that AI using agents to use tools better than humans. So Manus, for example, which I'm sure you're aware of. So, that's a really mind-blowing thing. And that's kind of the new baseline, right? So one person using Manus is, I don't know, maybe it's way more than 10x in terms of productivity. So, I think it's kind of going back to a blank sheet of paper and saying, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? What are the unique assets that we have? This company has a lot of relationships. And, how do we help those people achieve their goals in better ways? So I think that really is going to be the private equity playbook going forward. I certainly wouldn't want to be a private equity firm that doesn't have someone like you, an AI expert, that's part of an implementation team, part of a team that's responsible for delivering that 3 to 5 increase, over the 5 to 10 year time frame.
So you say your next acquisition, your next business will be mainly AI focused, and how can we reduce costs with AI?
Yeah, so that's one that I'm looking at. It could be that, it doesn't work for a variety of different reasons. But on the go forward for me, it's all about applied AI. Whether that's a new idea or it's acquiring a new company because that makes more sense, right? It's already going and, already has some brand recognition and already has an installed base and, has assets that are interesting. But yeah, for me, it's all about applying AI. And I would really hate to be in a company that's kind of like you're going to hear later today when we have a conversation with someone who's coming in from the, I don't want to get too specific, but let's say the healthcare industry, and you'll hear about kind of some of their implementations of AI, and they had someone come in and say, here's effectively our version of ChatGPT, and let's have it draw a picture. Well, how related to the purpose of the company? I can tell you it's not a photography company or an art company. So how related to the purpose of the company is that application, right? So I think the real value, like where the two things that need to come together to create an explosion of value. One is a deep empathetic understanding of the problem that the people are trying to solve, and then a really deep understanding of what the tools can do and what the tools can't do. And I think you bring those together, that's where the magic happens. So that's where I'm going to be with my career. And I need to know that I'm interested enough to get a deep understanding. Of course, I'm interested enough in the AI, but it's really that Venn diagram that I think is where the value creation happens.
Interesting. So what has been one of your biggest challenges, and what did this moment teach you about yourself?
You mean this moment in AI or the challenge that I faced?
I mean, in general, like one of the biggest challenges in your life.
Yeah, I would say one of the challenges that I've faced is that I have a strength and a weakness around really diving deep into a topic and kind of becoming obsessed with that topic. And that's a strength because you can take in a lot of information and you can see patterns, and that's a strength. But then the downside of that is most people that you collaborate with don't have that same level of obsession. So just on the train ride here to come see you, I was watching this short video of Larry Ellison from Oracle, and he was talking about his friendship with Steve Jobs. And he said that they were neighbors, they hung out all the time, and Steve Jobs said, "Hey, Larry, how about you come over to my house tonight and we'll hang out?" And he said, "Well, I'll do it on one condition. We're not going to watch Toy Story." And he said, "Steve, I've seen it 75 times. And you're going to show me the 4 seconds where you increase the shading on, a particular character." He's like, great, don't care. Right? Don't want to see it. And so I think that level of obsession leads to a kind of like loneliness, right? Because Steve Jobs wanted his friend to be part of it and celebrate it, but the guy's like, don't care, right? He's running Oracle. I mean, he's got a lot of stuff going on in his life. So I think there is a kind of loneliness that's a challenge there with that obsession. And honestly, AI helps with that because it's right there with you, right? However obsessed and into the thing you are, it's going, yeah, and what about this idea and that idea, right? So I think it's an incredible thought partner. But yeah, I would say broadly the biggest challenges that I've had has been an obsession that kind of leads to, a disconnection from the group that I'm working with, where I'm just like, I want to go further and deeper, and they're the Larry Ellison going, I can't, not for the 75th time, look at the shading change. So, Yeah. So having AI has been wonderful. And really only for the last, 2 years, right? That it's been a really useful partner there. But yeah.
Did you always want to get into entrepreneurship, or how did you get into it?
So I didn't care about business at all growing up. I grew up in Washington, D.C., which is not a business town. It's a government town. And I actually, from this intentional community that I grew up in, there was a vague sense that like business people were, I don't know, that it wasn't really a great way to spend your life. It was kind of a bit too small, a bit too like, yes, it needed to happen in the abstract. We need business, it's a capitalist system, but it was a bit kind of beneath, like, yeah. So it wasn't an interest of mine at all. In fact, the reason that I got into business was that I was doing research at NYU and in psychology. I have an undergrad degree in psychology. And the professor said, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing here? He's like, there's nothing here for you in psychology. He said, look at where all of the smart, talented people are. They're all going to California. They're all going to Silicon Valley. He said, don't waste your life here in Bobst Library here on Washington Square. This isn't the place for you. And, he's a guy I looked up to a lot, still look up to, Professor Paul Vitz. And I took his advice. I didn't go to Silicon Valley, but I started an internet company. I said, okay, he said, build the future. Don't worry about us talking about Freud and Jung and all this stuff. He's like, build the future. It's happening now. So that was really what kind of got me into it. It wasn't, from a lifelong interest in business.
Was there a point of time where you wanted to quit entrepreneurship?
Yeah, yesterday, the day before that. Yeah, I mean, it's the most brutal thing in the world. It's really, it's incredibly challenging. The highs are very high, the lows are super low. It's more of a game, I would say. I think it helps to be, clever. It helps, to have all of those things. You see that, among these really leading entrepreneurs. But I think the core of it is more around resilience, persistence, a tolerance for failure, uncomfortable moments. I would say that those are really the things that kind of separate, entrepreneurs, because the volume of bad news and the volume of problems that you get is, I mean, you just can't believe it until you do it. It comes at you so fast and so hard. So, yeah, so the many times that I thought about quitting, and and I think kind of self-knowledge, like knowing what motivates you and what kind of makes it worth it for you is really essential, because you've got to answer that question. When you get the 100th no on an idea that you think is great and important, 100th no in a row, you've got to have something inside of you that says, I think this is right. I think this is good. And I've been invited to be part of kind of teaching entrepreneurship, and I've always said no, because I feel like it's much more of a character thing. And if you look at a lot of entrepreneurs, they've had terrible childhoods, or they're somehow outsiders. Like, you're much younger than me, but when I was growing up, to be gay would be like a problem. You would be an outsider. Now I don't think it is meaningful at all, but to have that kind of, you're an other, an outsider, and have a different perspective, and then to be persisting in that, I think is really helpful to have that background. That's why I'm not a big fan of teaching it, because I think I think we already have, with entrepreneurship, a lot of kind of shiny, cover of Time magazine, a lot of like turning entrepreneurs into saints, and then people think, oh, wouldn't it be great to make several $1 billion and to do all of this stuff? But the pain to get there is just unreasonable. And then, the path is we turn them into our heroes and then we destroy them, right? We're seeing that with Elon Musk right now, right? He was a hero. Now, I don't know how big his security team is, but I guess it's pretty big. So, yeah. So, yeah, I think it really has to be an intrinsic thing. In my case, it's almost that these ideas just get a hold of me and I become obsessed with them and I just need to work them out of my system, and I need to figure out how to do it, and that's really what drives me.
So your why is like your ideas and how to bring them to life.
Yeah. And I mean, one way to look at it is it's almost like a virus. I just become like a carrier for this idea for a certain amount of time until it works itself out, and then I'm like, oh, thank God, that's over. And then, something else grabs me and rides me for a couple of years.
What are some of the successes you're most proud of?
I don't really look back with a lot of pride. Maybe that's kind of growing up in a sort of Calvinist society and all of that. There isn't a big, pride doesn't have much of a place, let's say, in that society. But I think proud of overcoming obstacles and, making, companies that survived and thrived against a lot of, big odds. Figuring out things that were hard to figure out is rewarding for me. I would say in my teaching, I'm very proud of seeing the progress. So where a student begins and where the student ends up is very, very satisfying. Yeah, I would say those are the biggest sources of pride for me.
What's your approach to company culture and team building?
So, I'm not a big fan of most HR initiatives, and I feel like culture. I feel like culture has a lot to do with observing the person. So if you think of like a child observing a parent, it's much more important what the parent does than what the parent says. So I think the culture flows naturally from the leaders. And you often see a kind of weird, even physical resemblance within a company with the leader. There is a sort of cult element, particularly to small startups. But yeah, I believe that it's necessary to kind of tend to the culture, but I think most of it is going to come from just how you behave, and so it's really important to be careful about how you behave and consider how you act in situations. And then I think it's also important who you select. So you need to be selecting people with similar values, similar drive, and that selection will determine the culture. So it's you or your partners as a founder, and then the people that you select out to, let's say, the first 10 or 15, that's your culture. I don't know that, barbecues or, trying to get out of an escape room are really the things that drive a culture. If people appreciate it, great, do it. But I think it's much more about things you really can't even change about yourself are going to shape the culture, and then who you select. And that's incredibly important.
In entrepreneurship, there is often the case where a big challenge comes up or you kind of feel stuck. How do you get out of this feeling of being stuck and solve the problem?
So I think this goes back to like resilience and persistence. So, certain people, and it'll be kind of detectable in like a personality test that you take, will kind of start with why things won't work. I find, for me as an entrepreneur, given the volume of challenges that you face, that's not the best way. That doesn't really work for me. It really needs to be about, and I try to put this into the companies that I work with, what are 3 solutions and your recommendation for every problem, and to build up that muscle. So every time you see a problem, you're like, okay, I know what I need to do. I need to come up with 3 solutions, rank them, have a recommendation. And that sounds very simple, but that implies that you've defined the problem quite clearly, which is a lot of it, right? What actually is the problem? And then you just say, by default, I'm going to come up with 3 distinct solutions, and I'm going to rank them. So I think building that helps you just say, okay, I've got, that problem, that problem, that problem. I know what to do, right? I have a default approach. Another thing that we talk a lot about in my companies is this Chinese saying that solving a problem is the ticket to the next problem. So there's no expectation that we're going to solve a problem and it's over. The expectation is solving that problem means now we have another one and we're going to solve that. So you kind of normalize this idea that I'm a problem-solving machine, right? That's what I do. And that helps to overcome a sense of overwhelm, or this is too much, or I don't know, and what could I do? And especially with AI as a thinking partner now, it's so much better because you can just say, you can talk to it or write and just say, here are the problems that I'm experiencing. Please give me 3 alternatives and a solution, and rank them and ask me questions. So you have a thinking partner that can help, that isn't, overwhelmed by emotion with the problem, which can often happen.
When you consider a new venture, what criteria do you look for to make sure it has a meaningful impact and it's also good for you? It's also a good personality fit.
Yeah, I think first of all, it needs to be hitting the status quo sideways. So it needs to be like a radical departure from how things are done. Because as a startup, you're completely under-resourced compared to the incumbents. So the incumbent has industry knowledge that you don't have. They have customers, they have revenue, they have all of these different things. So if you're going to compete with them by trying to be like 1 or 2% better, forget it. It's really got to be a departure. And really the only advantages that you have are, in my case, there has to be some strong application of AI, right? That has to be there. Then there has to be some advantage to speed, because larger companies and incumbents are really slow. So, by the time that they've thought through it, and they're sort of tied up in their own thing, and there are lots of stakeholders, you can come in with a fresh approach with, better tech, and you have a chance. Otherwise, you're just going to get steamrolled. So for me personally, it needs to be something that's dramatically better, because also that helps reduce your execution risk, because you're just going to mess up a bunch, right? So it's really important that the idea that you're building on is so good, so different, that you can kind of screw up and it's still going to make it, right? It's still going to survive. Then other criteria that I have is that it should be a company that, lately the way I've been thinking about things is where it gathers information, applies intelligence, and then sells it back. So there needs to be some way for you to, add intelligence into a system by aggregating a lot of data. And that naturally leads to advantages around almost kind of monopolistic advantages. Because, if you look at like LinkedIn, for example, I don't even know what the number 2 competitor to LinkedIn is, right? You have these network effects, which are highly defensible, once you're there. It's very hard to say, well, I'm going to create another LinkedIn. It's like, oh, geez, really? Why? I don't want to have to put my profile on another one. And there are a lot of examples like that. So I'm looking for something that's defensible, where I can mess up, and is doing something, where it kind of has a secret, it has a kind of idea about how a thing can be better that other people haven't latched onto. And usually they haven't latched onto it because they're not so close to the tech and so close to the problem that they can see the opportunities. So if you're in a system, a business that's just been maintaining and all of your energy goes into that, you're pretty vulnerable to an attack, potentially vulnerable to an attack from fresh thinking outsider. And the fact is, most entrepreneurs come from larger companies already in a space. They had some ideas and they get knowledge, contacts, all of that, they leave and then create a challenger. So, that's most of the companies in Silicon Valley, right? That's how they start. So then I'm also looking for a company that I can leave. It's very important for me once it's working and profitable that I can move on, because I'm not really interested in staying as a company gets larger. That's not my skill set, running a large company. I'm much more of a revolutionary than someone who runs the government.
Are there any exciting initiatives or projects that you would like the audience to know about?
I can't really talk about too much now, but I can tell you that we're working on helping. We're working in the health area now, and we're working on helping people to collect information about themselves, so using Apple Watch or other remote patient monitoring systems, and looking at natural solutions, so plant-based medicines. There hasn't been a lot of data around plant-based medicine. What we want to do is help people to figure out what they could be taking that would help them to reach their goals, and then monitor and see, create a feedback loop where they say, okay, that helped, that didn't help, and narrow it and apply lots of intelligence. So the scientific literature, creating digital twins, using the person's own information and matching that up with laboratory reports, and piecing all of that together in a way where someone can really make smart, evidence-based decisions to improve their health. And where I come from in the States, where I was born, it's a very unhealthy country right now. And weirdly, every time I go back, I was just there over Christmas, I gain 5 kilos, 10 pounds over the course of a week or two. And I don't think I'm eating that much more differently. And then I come back and I shrink again. So there's something happening there that's systemic, that's leading to poor health. So yeah, I'm excited about that as a mission. And that is in line with what I've just been describing, right? You're gathering lots of information, applying intelligence, and then delivering it to people.
And where can the listeners follow you and keep updated with your project?
Yeah, just on my website. So claydouglas with 2s's.com is a good place to be. And then I'm expanding with social media. We have a podcast called State Change. So statechangepod.com, where we talk about every week plant medicine and what we're doing there. So yeah, those would be good spots.
Thanks so much for talking, and it was very interesting.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you, André.